If you're here to listen to two very well-informed people about mushrooms, you're in the right place. This session is about opportunities and challenges diversifying into mushroom production. And I'm very excited to have Tom Baxter and James Scriven here today. Just before I do a bit more of an intro for those two, we've got some basic housekeeping. Do keep your microphone off when you're not speaking. And this is recorded, and do use the chat for questions, discussion, and sort of general comments. We will keep an eye on those questions. I know there's a lot to fit in this session today from our speakers, so we'll try and do our best to get to some of those questions towards the end or throughout. So a little bit of background. The UK apparently is less than 50% self-sufficient in mushrooms, which is surprising for a crop that is largely non-seasonal. So is it a low-hanging fruit in terms of raising its production levels in the UK? We'll be looking at running an organic mushroom business, the kind of aspirations and pitfalls and challenges that Tom's been facing, touching upon mycoremediation, which is the process of cleaning the environment using fungi, the challenges of upscaling production, and could diversifying an enterprise into mushrooms be a solution? An existing growing enterprise, food growing enterprise, could that diversifying into mushroom production, could that be a solution? And how do we support new entrants into mushroom growing through potentially things like relatively cheap converted portable spaces and trial before you buy schemes? So as I said, we've got Tom Baxter to kick us off. He's a founder of the Bristol fungarium. In 2019, he downed tools on farm and invested all he had into creating the business, producing the UK's first organic certified medicinal mushrooms. Today they are, and I think this figure is out of date, I think if I'm correct, they're cropping over a ton of 18 strains of fungi each month, including maitake, shiitake, king oyster, and 7 other strains of oyster mushroom, wine caps, lion's mane, reishi, turkey tail, and cordyceps, many of which now featured in the first UK grown organic certified range of medicinal mushroom products to hit the market. So welcome, Tom. And we have James Scriven, who is the head grower at Coed Talilan in Wales and the founder of mycoremediation, which is an online resource. We'll be sharing links to that to support new mushroom growers and promote mushroom cultivation as a diversification strategy for small to medium scale farming enterprises. And as a site for innovative approaches to mushroom cultivation spanning nearly 20 years, Coed Talilan offers the opportunity to research into applied mycology, developing new ideas and techniques to enhance the productivity of integrated agro ecosystems, such as using indigenous mycorrhizal inoculants and demonstrating the practice of working with particular species that complement horticulture. Another interesting nugget is that Coed Talilan has founded a land trust to launch the Refungium project that will create a 30-acre fungal nature reserve with a primary objective to increase fungal biodiversity. I just thought I'd give a bit of a extended biog, as we didn't quite manage to get them on the Hoover platform, and they have a lot of history behind them and expertise. And just a little call out from Soil Association, we're setting up a network of growing enterprises at Wood Oaks Farm, which is on the outskirts of London. Link is just in the chat there. If you're interested, we are looking for mushroom growers. So if you're interested in exploring that idea, please get in touch. And there's more information in the link there. It should be a really vibrant network with the ability to share resources such as processing resources, drying and canning and bottling, that kind of thing. So without further delay, I'm going to hand over to Tom, who's going to kick us off. Thank you.
Thanks, Hugh. It was a fairly thorough introduction there. So I think the background of the Bristol fungarium is I was an organic veg farmer for 3 years prior to looking for something sort of counter-cyclical to do in terms of fruiting over the winter months. And so I invested a chunk of cash into 5 shipping containers that we then converted over into mushroom growing facilities. On paper, the price per kilo made it look like it was a viable option because it was comparable to, you know, things like asparagus and artichokes and sort of all the high value stuff you can grow when you're growing veg. And you know, we're sort of 3 years down the line now. We no longer grow any veg. We've moved site. We've now got a 5,000 square foot barn. We're actually cropping quite a bit more than a ton a month now, probably, well, yeah, between a ton and a half and upwards. We sell around about half of what we grow into the edible market in Bristol. I'll just attempt to share a screen here and just, yeah, give you a little bit of videos to watch, which are always lovely. So where we're at now is, yeah, we're growing, what, 1.5 tons a month, and this is us. So I'll show you a nice video of, oh, wait there, nice video of some mushrooms growing. So this is actually one of the processes. So in front of a flow hood there, where after we've cooked up the bags, Henry is opening up a great bag of grain spawn that we're then mixing in front of the laminar flow hood and mixing them up. Then these bags will spend anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months in our incubation room, which is at 20 degrees, and then we'll move them into fruiting chamber. At the moment, we are probably about 60% of the turkey tail, which is this mushroom here, which is going into our tinctures, is actually wild forage. So we spend a lot of time foraging, you know, turkey tail at the moment, and that's one of the lion's mane. So what we do slightly differently to other people is a lot of the mushrooms we grow are mushrooms that we've foraged locally and cloned. And so we were the first people to find lion's mane in the southwest for around about 6 years, I believe. Unfortunately, they cut the tree down that it was growing on, so we managed to get some, it's on the red list, so we're not actually allowed to harvest it in the wild, but this was smashed across the floor. And so that actually led us to where we are now, because I rang up, found out who owned the land, and rang them up and you know, had a bit of a go at them for cutting the tree down, and then asked them if they had any land for sale. And Abe, who's now a friend of mine, was like, don't sell land, you can't make any money off land, why could you possibly want land? And I said, well, I wanted to build a barn. And he was like, well, I've got millions of barns. So he turned out the family owned about 2,000 acres just outside Bristol. And he took me around various, you know, bedraggled, you know, broken barns that he had. And to be fair to him, he's built us like a 5,000 square foot insulated barn with SIPS panels. And yeah, it's been fantastic for us. And the I guess what I'll try and do now is just give you a brief understanding of like the mushroom market. I mean, you've got the edible mushrooms, which, you know, at the moment the UK market is dominated really by 3 companies: Monaghan's, Livesy's, and Smithy's. Smithy's and Livesy's have recently sold 50%, well, around about 50% of equity to Asian companies. One Chinese mushroom company and Korean company, a big conglomerate called Hyundai. So you're going to see a huge increase in the quantity of UK grown exotic mushrooms hitting the supermarkets in the next 18 months. So there's sort of the window of opportunity on the edible exotic mushroom is really going to tighten. I mean, I don't think really there's going to be a huge amount of space for smaller growers going forward, because what they're doing is they're just filling shipping containers full of substrate from China and bringing them over here and fruiting them in. There's some very large planting applications that have recently been put in up in Lancashire. And so although we're able to, you know, sell around about £2,000 or £3,000 a week in edible mushrooms through you know, existing restaurants, farm shops, and at markets, I'm not really sure how much more scope there is really to be able to push further than that. I mean, the wholesale price of mushrooms coming in from Poland and Korea and China, 90% of all the mushrooms grown in the world are grown in China, and it's still impossible for a UK company really to compete on price. So we charge about £15 a kilo wholesale for organic certified edible mushrooms. You can buy them at the wholesale market for £8 to £9, £10 a kilo, and our quality is better, but you do still get decent quality mushrooms, coming over from China and from Korea, and so I'm not really sure what my reading of it is. There isn't going to be a huge opportunity on the edible front going forward for smaller growers. Then there's mycelium products, which sort of is everything from mushroom leathers to insulation panels, mycelium packaging. There's a big company called Ecovative who have raised just under £500 million in their last round. There's a company called the Magical Mushroom Company in the UK who've got a couple of one large factory in southeast London, another one up in Nottingham. They've just opened one over in Bulgaria, and they've really cornered the market on that. So there is some scope on mushroom leather side. We're working with a guy called Ashley Granter from Natura Design, and he's got a contract with Burberry currently doing mushroom leathers. We've actually just completed a project with him at a restaurant called the Ledbury in London, where we've just built a mushroom fruiting chamber for them, so they're going to be growing mushrooms in the restaurant and serving them in the restaurant. And we've done a huge amount of reishi panels and lots of sort of sculptural things using reishi antlers as sort of decoration and various other things. And so I think there might be some opportunity, to expand down that side. And then there's the mycoremediation side that a lot of people talk about. Not a huge, well, hardly any data is actually available on this. So at the moment, we're trialing 3 different substrate mixes with 3 different local oyster strains to ascertain over a 5-week period how much nitrates and phosphates are taken out of a fixed 100 litres of water over that period using our spent substrate. So it'll be interesting to know, what the actual data is on that and whether or not that's feasible, because theoretically we're producing about 60 tons of spent substrate a year, and because quite a large number of the mushrooms we grow are UK strains and are very local to the farm here. So we can potentially use that spent substrate to create like a mycelial filter to run some of the, one of the local streams here through. And there's quite a few, in this area here, there's 2 dairy farms with a huge amount of effluent going off. And so potentially that could be quite an interesting, if it works, if the data supports it, it could be quite an interesting next stage, doing field scale trials. And then there's the medicinal mushroom side, which is really where we're putting most of our emphasis at the moment. And we grow, lion's mane, reishi, maitake, turkey tail, shiitake, various different oysters, king oysters, and then we put them through a 3-stage extraction process. So the issue with mushrooms is they're made of chitin, and in Northern Europe, only around about 6% of people have chitinase, the enzyme in their gut to be able to digest chitin. And because the the compounds of interest, the sort of medicinal compounds which are of value, are held within chitin walls, you need to be able to basically break that chitin wall down and extract they're mainly beta-glucanes, which is a sort of structural polysaccharide, but also triterpenes and certain acids. And so we do one at 65 degrees for 36 hours, one at 122 degrees under pressure, and then an ethanol extraction 97% for 6 weeks, and then we basically mix those. And it's quite a bit more complicated than that, but that's in essence what we do. And we make a 1-to-4 extract ratio, which is well, it's not much stronger, but the strongest extract ratios you tend to find of Chinese products, and almost all the medicinal mushrooms in the UK are Chinese in origin. are the strongest is sort of 1:8 generally. So we're doing a much higher extract ratio, which also means we're having to grow a huge amount more mushrooms. You know, in retrospect, it was a very bad business decision, but it does mean that our products are, you know, are considerably better than the vast majority of products that are out there. And we've seen a lot of growth in the medicinal side. And I think also, you know, there's been a couple of documentaries on Netflix, obviously Merlin Sheldrake's book. There's been various, you know, it's sort of part of the zeitgeist at the moment. And so we're sort of benefiting from that to a certain degree. And yeah, so that's sort of my understanding of the market. Those are some of the tinctures that we make, what they look like after we've done them. And all those are pictures actually of mushrooms that we grow. And then, you know, various different, I think, you know, in terms of the medicinal side, it's important to understand the life cycle of the mushrooms and why these compounds actually exist. So from if you were to take a reishi or a turkey tail or a lion's mane, quite often a spore will land on a tree, in a crack, it will develop, the mycelial network will develop over potentially anything up to 20, 30 years before it completes its life cycle and fruits. And so the mycelium is one cell wall thick, so anything can pass into the mycelial body. So the mushrooms have to have these compounds which can outcompete the other viruses, the other bacteria, the other fungi that can get into their mycelial structure. So they have these secondary metabolites, which act as, you know, in essence, medicine to outcompete the other fungi, bacteria, and viruses. And because of, from an evolutionary perspective, the fungi kingdom predates both the animal and plant kingdom. We have 17 fungi receptors in our body, and so those compounds the mushrooms create to protect themselves, our body can also use to protect ourselves. And there's been an increasingly large amount of clinical trials being done in the Western world as opposed to in China, where over 90% of the research on medicinal mushrooms is done. So Imperial in London have been running a trial for using maitake with third stage breast cancer. There's actually an interesting documentary recently released on Netflix, again from the guys at Imperial, using psilocybin with people with like pretty profound depression. So yeah, there's a lot of, you know, interesting research being done and an increasingly large body of evidence. And we sort of understand now the pathways that these compounds are operating on. And some of the feedback we've had from people that have been taking our tinctures has been unbelievable, to be honest with you. So yeah, so that's really where we're at. And let's see what we've got here. Nice little video.
I have tasted the maggot in the man of the universe. It was not a thing. Then I knew I had to rise above it all. Drown.
And so that's a video we shot. We were quite lucky during COVID because a lot of the natural history guys who do a lot of filming for the BBC and stuff like that were out of work. And so we, you know, became good friends with a guy called Richard who does a lot of this stuff for like Blue Planet and all this sort of stuff. And so I can't tell you how long it took to get that to work. It was an inordinate amount of time. So that's actually one of the Somerset lion's mane that was shot in a studio in Clifton and Bristol. And so what we've also benefited from is I think the sort of the younger generation are like particularly keen on trying to do something slightly more meaningful with their existence. So we've been very fortunate in that the type of people we've been able to like attract to come and work with us, you know, at a level that, you know, when I used to work in the city, they're sort of the same level as people that go on graduate training programs at investment banks, at the big five management consultancies, Magic Circle, like law firms. And so we've been very, very fortunate in that we've been able to hire a lot of very bright, motivated, decent human beings. And it's kind of ironic when I know a lot of friends who have other businesses who are unable to hire anyone competent, and we are swimming in competency. So yeah, I think, you know, making a transition away from like farming veg as I did into mushrooms is not that easy to do. I mean, financially, I'm probably nearly £200,000 down, and I'm yet to turn a profit in a month. Hopefully next month will be the case that I do, but it's the growing of mushrooms is pretty simple. The ability to do it consistently and at scale and have the relationships and distribution networks and be able to market it is difficult. And that's what really takes the time. And when we were, our major client on the edible side was a company called Farm Drop that recently went bust. We lost a fair amount of money with them. And it's theoretically, it should be possible to have like lots of small mushroom growers. And I know quite a few mushroom growers. I also know quite a few mushroom growers that have gone out of business in the last 2 years. And I know quite a lot of people that are giving up at the moment. It's a lot of work, and the margins on a spreadsheet look viable. In reality, it's hard. I mean, I do know 2 people that are doing relatively well. I mean, they're functioning and they're not losing money, and they're both supplying Riverford. And yeah, and the only other person I know who's doing well does around about 15 markets in London, but he also has a very large farm and does a lot of other things. The other people I know that are growing sort of on a smaller scale in like 1 or 2 shipping containers, they're finding it pretty tough. So I think mushrooms offer a lot of possibilities, but in sort of our environment where you've got to pay British wages, the utility costs, it cost me about £2,000 a month in electricity. That's going to rocket in a couple of months' time. And so the margins are being cut, our costs, like everyone, are going up. And I think we're lucky in that we've got a large city on our doorstep, and people really care in Bristol about the provenance of their food. And I'm helping a couple of guys set up in sort of other parts of the country. But you know, unless you can hook into some decent distribution networks and get some level of scale, it's difficult, very difficult to make the numbers stack up. But hopefully we're nearly there, hopefully. So yeah, I'd recommend people give it a go, but make sure you've got a pretty decent bank balance before you start, because it's tricky. And also the reality is it is actually seasonal. Trying to grow large quantities of mushrooms in the summer is really, really difficult because the heat, the amount of money you have to spend on cooling, it's prohibitive. And also people eat a lot less mushrooms in the summer months. So from May through to sort of the end of September, you know, we see a drop of maybe probably around 60% in terms of demand for edible mushrooms from our restaurants or from our farm shops and stuff. It's also coincides with a very difficult period to grow mushrooms. The majority of mushrooms we grow are, well, in fact, all the mushrooms we grow are wood eaters. So they're wood decomposers. And they generally appreciate temperatures around about 14 degrees. And so when you're trying to fruit when the outdoor temperature is 25, 20, or anything above 20, it becomes prohibitively complicated. Contamination rates skyrocket. And yeah, it's proper hard work. So yeah, I'd recommend people give it a go, but yeah, it requires quite a lot of planning, and you need to be very good at building relationships and selling. That's really key to what's key to any business, but it's particularly key when you've got a product that isn't shelf stable for very long, and the quality sort of drops quite rapidly if you haven't shifted the product within 3 or 4 days. So yeah, so that's our story, really.
Thanks so much, Tom. A few questions have come in. It's been really, as somebody was just saying, thank you for your honesty. And I'd just echo that as well. I think it's really great to hear from somebody with your level of insight and experience from what you've been trying to achieve. Back when you were talking about, I think, mushrooms from abroad, there was a question through saying this should be about labeling and buying local. I don't want to buy food items from across the world when we have perfectly decent produce on our doorstep. Is there a link to farmers where more can be grown?
But the issue with that is price. I mean, it's all well and good everyone saying they want to buy local and they want to buy British and they want to buy organic. The truth of the matter is, in order for me to be able to pay everyone and be able to do it, I have got to charge twice the price wholesale that you can buy it in from overseas. And that means the price is going to be double to the consumer, because when the shops chuck on their market, when the shops double the price basically when they sell it. And so the issue you've got is that theoretically it's brilliant. That is what we should all be doing. But without people have a finite amount of money, and if you're going to have to buy my mushrooms off me from a shop at 35 pounds a kilo, it's prohibitively expensive. And so unless you can create some sort of direct consumer model where I can sell direct to consumers, but I don't have the ability to go out and deliver, or to have a permanent market stand or a permanent shop somewhere. And so there's a real issue, because there is a cost it takes to produce in the UK, and there's a price consumers are actually able to pay. And I'm not sure how closely aligned those two things are. So, going forward.
I'm just just going back to the idea of the issue of labeling. How clear is it that, well, I mean, surely it's clear that your produce is, grown in Bristol, and how clear is it that other produce that you say will be coming in will be flagged as grown in China or?
Not really. Well, it's one of the issues I have with the Soil Association, actually, because it's very easy for people to buy in, especially mushroom products from China that have the paperwork saying that they're organic. And unfortunately, there are some amazing growers in China, but it's also considerably easier in China to get paperwork to say many things. I used to live in China, and it seems considerably easier for people to buy in product from China, get the Soil Association to certify it as organic, as it is for someone like me to grow it organically in the UK, pay the Soil Association to be edited. And so certainly from a grower's perspective, and I know a lot of people that are, organic growers, there is a certain level of frustration that we have over here with bodies like the Soil Association, who make it relatively easy for overseas product to be brought in from places like China. They're obviously unable to check the paper line, but as long as you've got the paper, it can be accredited as Chinese. And I know, quite a few of the shops that we supply have Chinese organic certified dried mushrooms in there. And, how much, you're not able to check really. And so it's not really an even playing field. And so it can be, pretty frustrating, because there's no way of telling. And it would be a lot easier for me to just buy in product from China, which is organic certified in China, get the stamp, the Soil Association stamp over here, and sell it on. And so, yeah, it's a question of, this is the nature of the world. It's not a fair playing field. That's just the nature of the game. So I think if there was some, I don't know how you'd go about structuring it, but yeah, if there was some way of the Soil Association coming up with some different certification for UK grown Soil Association organic certified, as opposed to just it being Soil Association organic certified, irrespective of its country of origin, that might go some way. But it is what it is. We've got to play the field as it sits.
Yeah, no, that's another interesting insight to the challenges you're facing. And yeah, I think we should be taking that further. So with colleagues in the certification side. I'm just conscious of the time, and there are some more questions that have come in, but actually, I think a lot of those questions may be answered by James, because there's quite a few questions asking about, yeah, can mushrooms be grown as a mixed approach, and along that sort of line. So let's go with James, and then hopefully we'll have a chance to catch up with some of the questions, and Tom, feel free to tackle some if you're able. So James, over to you. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so following on from what Tom was saying, the difficulties of creating a standalone mushroom business, we're coming at a slightly different approach in the context of what we're doing here in this 70-acre woodland in East Carmarthenshire, as an opportunity to create a diverse income stream for a small to medium scale farming enterprise. So we are developing a one planet development as part of a shared equity co-housing scheme. Can't go into the details of one planet development at the moment, but basically it means that to meet the policy requirements, I have to create an income stream to meet my minimum needs. So the amount of profit I need to make from this, from our land-based livelihoods here, is a lot less than a standalone business would be. So as part of this project, we've created this platform to as a learning a platform for courses that we run here, and to bring together these ideas and present them and share them more widely. So our aim is that we can create this integrated approach for mushroom production for market gardens, CSAs, other farming enterprises that already have a customer base. And yeah, so we see a need for those kind of solutions, of these kind of more collaborative approaches to localized food provision. And mushrooms can give an interesting sideline to those projects. So we want to present these low-tech, low-energy solutions that are easily adopted by people that are already busy with developing other growing schemes. So we want to be able to make it so they can reuse and recycle equipment and materials they already have, minimize the amount of single-use plastic that's involved in mushroom production, because this is a bit of an issue. Yeah, and look at ways that we can collaborate more closely to provide some more diversification in the food system. So there are a lot of interesting nutritional and medicinal mushrooms there that aren't as widely known as they could be. Most people, when they think about mushrooms, they think about the agaricus, the white and brown mushrooms, the portobello that you see in the supermarket. And shiitakes and oyster mushrooms are becoming more widely known, but there are a whole host of other species that that can be grown quite easily. And if you are providing, if you have a customer base that cares more about food, that's more interested in food, you can, they're probably be more open-minded and receive those suggestions for, increasing their mushroom intake. But okay, so what we're working with here, this is what you're faced with if you're looking to grow mushrooms. Firstly, you need a source of inoculum, the species that you want to work with. That's usually cultured into on a petri dish or in liquid culture. That's used to inoculate grain. Mostly the rye grain is used. This is then known as spawn. Spawn is then used to inoculate a fruiting substrate. So you have a range of options depending on the different mushroom species. And then you're moving that substrate into fruiting and harvest. So it's in each one of these stages, there's a range of techniques, skill sets, and equipment that's needed. Many people are put off by growing mushrooms because the challenges of creating a lab space and to make your own inoculum, create your own grain spawn, isn't for everyone. So this can be a stumbling block for people thinking about how to grow mushrooms. You can buy in spawn, and this is what a lot of growers do. So they don't have to invest in that equipment and infrastructure. But of course, that pushes the price, the costs, the input costs for your business up. So it does pay to be able to make your own grain spawn. But in the same way that growers don't look to save all their own seed, because seed saving is a specialized technique, so it is with this kind of lab work that's involved. So what we're suggesting is that what's required is a more spawn production. There's been a huge increase in interest in fungi and mushroom growing, especially in the last couple of years, with some popular films that have come out with people with more time on their hands because of lockdown. Last year it was quite difficult to get hold of spawn. It was the usual suppliers were run off their feet with the kind of orders they were faced with. So there is a bit of a bottleneck here for spawn production. So what we're suggesting is that there should be more regional spawn labs, more regional spawn production. These spawn labs could then supply a coordinated network of regional growers. These growers being existing CSAs, market gardens, small to medium scale farmers that have a customer base or can sell directly to the customers locally. They just then have to concentrate on preparing the fruiting substrate and then moving that into the stage of harvesting. So this is what we're looking at. These are the 5 easiest species to grow. Oysters. Most people have seen these oyster kits. Oysters are very adaptable. You can grow them on a huge range of substrates. It's a tried and tested method, growing oyster mushrooms on straw. So this is what we're looking at. How could we produce a core production, a weekly yield of around 15 kilos of oysters a week? It's not a huge amount, but again, if it's part of a diversified production for existing market garden, that could be attractive to some. We're going to look at, so I'm going to go through how to grow the oysters and what's required there for because you do need a controlled environment. We don't have time in this presentation to talk about these other 2 options here for the shiitake and turkey tail. But suffice to say, it's actually quite easy to grow mushrooms on logs. There's a lot of detail, you'd have to go into. There's issues around, around the amount of labor involved in shiitake. There's ways we're trying to reduce that. But if you do have access to a woodland and you can get hold of logs, hardwood logs mostly, you can certainly grow turkey tail very easily. And there is a growing market for turkey tail. So I grow turkey tail here in the woodland. I don't have any problem selling it dried, whole. I sell it shredded, and I also make an added value product with certain herbs that we grow here as well. Shiitake, very easy to sell. People know shiitake. So I can produce a minimum amount fresh from a log rotation. Anything in excess of that I can dry. It's very easy to dry mushrooms and store them. And then you're at liberty to sell them, when and whenever you like. So those would be the 3 easy core production income streams for this diversification scheme. And then you've got this option of using mushroom mulches. So this is more seasonal. I should say actually, well, the shiitake, yeah, you can shock those into fruiting. The turkey tail is seasonal. But these mushroom mulches, the wine cap, garden giant, King Stropharia, very, very easy to grow on wood chip. You can grow it as a mulch around fruit trees and fruit bushes, or you can make a deeper raised bed. Yeah, they get 2 flushes a year from that. The wood bluet, you can grow this on a mixture of lignin-rich material and manure. And this has a very strong flavor. It's a winter fruiting mushroom as well. So again, we're not looking at huge yields, but it could add an interesting marketing angle for a farming enterprise. It adds a bit of interest. You know, it's and it's not much work to prepare these beds. So those are the 5 species that we're suggesting are the easiest ones to go with. There are these other 2 here that need a bit more research and testing. I've grown elm oyster, which again is a mulch, mostly sawdust and straw around brassicas. The yields aren't that big, but it's quite a shallow bed. Almond portobello, which is a cousin of the Agaricus bisporus, actually has some interesting medicinal values as well. I've grown this on leach cow manure, so I'd like to test this on a larger scale using the leach cow manure inoculated with almond portobello as a mulch in a polytunnel. Okay, so just in looking at the straw here, you've got some options. Standard approach to pasteurizing the straw, treating the straw to remove competitor microorganisms is heat pasteurization. Obviously, there's it can be a lot of cost in heating the water. It can take time to monitor that depending on what setup you're using. The other option is lime pasteurization. So this is cheaper. It's very easy. But you're dealing with calcium hydroxide, so it's lime creates a very strong alkaline solution. So you've got to take some precautions there in using those chemicals. Pellets. This is probably the future of growing oyster mushrooms. Very, very easy. You just add water. No heating required. The pelletization process essentially sterilizes the material. If you buy it in bulk, you can get it at 30p a kilo. Yeah, and there's an opportunity here for someone to start producing organic pellets. Yeah, we're going to look here at an option that using this lime pasteurization with this IBC here. So this setup we made here cost about £120 all in all. So we've just taken an IBC, cut the top third off, and there's a stainless steel mesh there raised on bricks. The straw goes into the IBC. It's covered with water. We add the calcium hydroxide, bring the water up to the required pH. We have this pump cycling it through the pipework there to ensure we have a good, even circulation of that water. And we're leaving it for 12 hours. That then goes into the top half that we cut off. We mix in the spawn, and that goes into cropping containers. Very often, cropping containers for oyster mushrooms have been plastic bags, but again, this is a question of single-use plastic, so you can use buckets with drilled holes. So we're using 25-litre buckets as part of this suggested scheme. Yeah, so you can see there the equipment there with the buckets. Inputs is 20 kilos of straw. So this is more or less a small straw bale. Those are the quantities of calcium hydroxide. Treating this alkaline solution for disposal, we use a base, so we're using citric acid. and it needs 2 kilos of grain spawn or sawdust master spawn here to inoculate that straw. So again, we don't really have time to go into all the intricacies of this, but roughly with a mushroom species, you're looking for a biological efficiency. So that's a conversion of dry weight of substrate to fresh weight of mushrooms at 100%. So there's claims with oyster strains you can get 200 and 250%, but a realistic approach is to look at 75 to 100%. So if you're processing 20 kilos of dry straw per week, if you get your technique down, you could look at getting a yield of 15 to 20 kilos a week once that rotation has reached the correct stage. But then we have to factor in contamination rates and that kind of thing. So but this is doable. We'll come back to that, but but you'll need some kind of controlled environment. So this is what we looked at. Rather than shipping containers, which has been used in the past, shipping containers are a lot more expensive than they were, especially smaller ones, and they're harder to get hold of. But these insulated truck boxes are very common now. Lots of supermarkets have a turnover of these vans. So you can find these on eBay. There are other suppliers. And you can pick up a pre-insulated, and the internal walls are cladded for anything between 600 to £1,000. So at the beginning of last year, we were looking around for one of these. We actually then found this box trailer on a twin axle trailer. It's a similar dimensions, 4 meters by 2 meters than these truck boxes. So we bought this. It means we had to insulate it and clad it, but it made it more mobile. And we thought, well, okay, we could then share this as a resource to help train other local growers. So we fitted it out with intake and outlet fans. The inlet fan is pre-filtered, and it's pumped through. The ducting system is worked through a humidifier. We have shelving on metal bars and with these PVC pipes, so we can adjust and remove the shelving. So we have an option of having substrates on shelves, so removing that and having them on bags from these bars, or stacking these buckets. There's a radiator. This is attached to a pump and a compost heating system, and then but we've also put these tube heaters in. We're off grid here, so electricity does become an issue. So that's some pictures of it there. You can see the ducting going up into the corners. That's the humidifier in that heavy duty plastic box there. And that's the PVC pipe on attachments to the bars there. Again, this is really all these designs. The equipment list and costings will be on our website. So it's something that anyone can do, really. It's not that complicated. And you've got this 8 square meter space to fruit mushrooms. The control unit you can adjust, and that works with sensors. So when the CO2 levels go too high, the fans come on. When the humidity drops, the humidifier, and so on. Then there's a question of the spawn. How are we going to be able to supply this network of regional growers with the spawn? This is what we'd be looking at if 10 growers were adopting the scheme suggested here. So annually, this regional spawn lab would have to produce 200 kilos of turkey tail and shiitake spawn, 100 kilos of the wine cap and wood blewit spawn, and it would be 80 kilos a month. So 2 kilos a week for each of those growers. Yeah. So the process here we're using is taking liquid culture. So again, there's been a lot of advances in low tech methods for mushroom cultivation. So you can culture mycelium in liquid honey, sterilized. You can use, I use 1 liter jars, so I easily get 500 liters of liquid culture there. And you only really require 5 milliliters to inoculate 1 kilo of grain. That grain can then go on to inoculate 10 kilos of the sawdust spawn. So it's at this level, it scales quite easily. And the amount of space that's required to produce that isn't that much really. So you're looking at smaller rooms, 8 square meters for a lab, incubation stage and dry storage, similar kind of area. You need a cleaning facility to be able to wash everything down, clean it when you've finished. Yeah, you need pressure cookers. You can get pressure cookers that work with induction hobs now. So yeah, obviously, if you're looking to do this yourself from the get-go, then it's a lot of upfront costs. What we'd be more focused on was finding one of those regional growers to take this on. Maybe they've got more capacity to do this, or aptitude to work with sterile culture technique. And then it's not much work for them just to scale up what they'd already be doing to meet their own growing scheme and provide spawn to those other growers. They wouldn't be required there'd be no marketing involved. They'd be able to sell it at a much lower cost to those growers, saving them time and providing the person running the spawn lab with extra income. So yeah, this scheme, is dependent on using wood pellets. So I mentioned straw pellets as being a very easy way of growing oyster mushrooms. Wood pellets are a really easy way of making sawdust spawn. So again, you're sort of dependent on this semi-industrial inputs. Yeah, and then there's the question of single-use plastic. So the easiest way of providing these spawn would be in these filter patch polypropylene bags. But it might be possible to use buckets, but again, more research and testing would have to be done if we were to supply spawn in buckets. But yeah, that is an issue with the single-use plastic. Okay, so yeah, gone through all that. Just to finish up, there's so last year we run courses here on mushroom cultivation. Last year we had a funded course for people involved in One Plant developments and Land Workers Alliance members. So we're running another course. So it's subsidized through funding from the Land Workers Alliance. And we're trying to reach out to existing market gardens and CSAs that might be interested in helping us test this out and see if it works for them. So if you're interested in that, there's more information on our website there.
Thank you so much, James. Sorry to cut in. It's almost like we could have either one of you for an hour, really, and just so much information and interesting angles to go through. There's just a little bit of a theme that I picked up in the questions that I just grouped them together about the sort of health implications of working with mushrooms. So rather not consuming, but maybe could one of you talk a little bit about the health, have you had any experience of health implications of working with mushrooms? And somebody has said, is there any data on nutritional value of industrially produced mushrooms, I guess, versus your own produce?
I mean, if I take up I noticed someone mentioned mushroom lung, which is a real issue it's mainly the spores from oyster mushrooms that cause this. So, it seems to be, some people seem to be more predisposed to getting it than others. And yeah, I mean, we wear like masks when we're working in the fruiting chamber. There are certain strains of oyster mushrooms you can grow that are sporeless now. I see, lots of people are, someone was mentioning about morels, there's about 7 different types, well, I think there's more than 7 actually, of morchella. There's the fire morel, which is the Israeli strain that you can grow off wood chip. In China, they've done phenomenally well over the last 7 years. They've upped morel production from, I think it was about 20 tons like 5 years ago, to something ridiculous like 20,000 tons now. Growing morels, we actually trialed trying to grow morels in one of our polytunnels at our last site. There's quite a lot of science to it. There's some Danish guys that have done really well, and I think they're going to be releasing some sort of production bits. There were 2 mycologists. It took them 20 years to nail it. And so, yeah, I think in terms of morel production, I think potentially, I know one guy over here who's having a proper go at it and putting some proper money down behind it. So maybe we'll be able to get morels growing over here. You need the thing is with morels, you need to basically create a huge nutrient-rich environment. So there's a lot of extra nutrition bags that are put on the beds. And they have a sort of symbiotic relationship with grasses and other stuff. So it's a lot more complicated than growing the mushrooms that we grow that are all wood decomposers. And yeah, so yeah, I mean, it's an issue. There's anything in life, there's issues. Spores are very real. I mean, above your head at any one point, there are, I think, around 2 or 3 billion mushroom spores, in that sort of foot area in a column going up to the stratosphere. So, we are surrounded by spores. But yeah, mushroom growers' lung is a real thing, mainly caused by the spores from oyster mushrooms.
Thank you, Tom. James, I just wondered if you might be able to speak to, very briefly, because we've had such a range of species kind of presented to us between the 2 of you. What are we likely to see when we go into a supermarket? How restrictive is it that the sorts of mushrooms that we generally like to see?
Well, I don't have a lot of options of supermarkets where I live. So yeah, I understand that Tesco's now have a wider range, but yeah, it's mostly just white, people commonly call white and brown mushrooms, the Agaricus bisporus. The portobello is just Agaricus bisporus. Chestnut mushrooms, they're all just slight variations on the same species. So yeah, there's a lot more room.
I think the important
go on.
I think the important thing to note with like the Agaricus, they are all grown off shit and peat. The mushrooms that James and I are talking about are all wood decomposers, and so we don't use peat in any shape or form for any of our mushroom cultivation. So yeah, the sort of peat conversation is slightly it's not really relevant. It's not relevant at all to what we do. But the majority of mushrooms that are eaten are white, brown, chestnut. They're all the same type of mushroom, and they're all grown off peat and shit. So that's a valid conversation for a different type of mushroom.
Yeah.
At the moment, you're seeing in Tesco at the moment. It's through Smithies. Smithies have got a contract with them, and they are, you're getting maitake now in Tesco. You're getting king oysters. The king oysters, ironically enough, do actually come from Korea. The shimeji also come from Korea. The shiitake are from the UK. They're grown up in Lancashire, although the blocks actually start off life in China, and they're shipped over and fruited in Lancashire.
Thank you, Tom. Sorry to cut you off. I think we are about to get cut off, but I don't think it's unworthy to mention that either of your mushrooms are peat-free. I think that's a real a positive attribute, that you're both exploring things without completely peat-free and avoiding that whole debate. Thank you both so much for being here today and with all of your insight. I think we're closed now at 5, and it's been a really interesting tour of what you 2 are up to. So thank you again, and thank you for joining today. And people can get in touch via those links, hopefully, if they need to.
Thanks, guys.
Great.
Cheers, James.
Cheers.